Veronica Butler had really gotten her life together. She was fighting for those kids. This was a very antagonistic, hateful, some very strong and powerful language at her son in terms of who was going to have control of these children, and it wasn't going to be him. It certainly wasn't going to be Veronica. They had hoped to commit this crime, the grandmother, clear back in February, but it took them a while to come up with this scheme. True crime enthusiasts, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindafer. I have over 28 years of federal law enforcement experience investigating cases, and we're going to cuss and discuss a really important case. I think a little bit of a deviation. Normally, I interview at least once a week, but this week there's a case that really touched me for a lot of reasons. First of all, because I'm a mom, like many of you. Second of all, the part of the country, Kansas, because I'm from Kansas. And finally, it really touched me because I think this is a case that can cause true change in laws, true changes that could affect others not having the same horrible situation happen to them that happened to Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. For those of you unfamiliar with this case, I'm going to set it up for you. Essentially, Veronica Butler had two children. Her children were not in her custody. In fact, legally, custody had been awarded to her husband. I shouldn't say her husband, I should say the father of her children. He was a meth addict and has been incarcerated for violations involving a gun, and currently is in a facility for round-the-clock treatment, not allowed to leave, in Oklahoma City. Now, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were from a little town in Kansas called Hugoton. Now, Hugoton is literally right across the border from Oklahoma and is in one of the most desolate parts of the United States you will find. Literally, in this part of the country, you will not see a lot of green. You won't see trees. You'll see true desolate land. There's a lot of cattle farming. There's a lot of pig farming. There are slaughterhouses in this part of the country. And this part of the country has a lot of diversity because of the people who work in these slaughterhouses. And it also has a lot of very rich landowners. Now, these aren't people that buy Gucci bags and live in mansions and drive Ferraris. No, these people drive pickup trucks and they spend their money very frugally. And in this case, this group that we're going to talk about that was involved in this area was known as God's Misfits. Now, God's Misfits were basically a quasi-cult / sovereign citizen type group, very small, but they had meetings and they had gatherings, and their philosophy was anti-government. And you're going to see how this really comes into play in this story. But back to Veronica Butler and the day she went to go pick up her children to take them to a birthday party. Now, this had been arranged long in advance. And because of the parameters of her visitation, she always had to have someone with her to see her children. Now, you might ask, ugh, that sounds bad. Who needs visitation to be monitored if you're a decent mom? Well, the problem was with Veronica is she allowed her children, apparently, around her brother, and her brother was accused of sexually assaulting her little children. And it's a sick story. I mean, these kids are young, 6 and 8 currently, and were assaulted when they were even younger. So it's a sad and tragic story, and essentially the father of these children, as I mentioned, gained custody. But because of his legal troubles and his addiction issues, they ended up being really in the true custody of Tiffany Adams. Tiffany Adams is the mother of the father of the children. I'm going to refer to her moving forward as the grandma. So the grandma, while she didn't have legal custody, she had physical custody of these children. And essentially, Veronica Butler had really gotten her life together. She owned the cutest small nutrition shop in Hugoton. She was involved in her community. She was involved in her church. Everyone speaks so lovely of Veronica. And everyone deserves a second chance. I mean, she was pretty young. At this point, she's 27 years old, which is still fairly young, but she had really turned her life around and she was fighting for those kids. And this was a very antagonistic, hateful dispute with a lot of disgusting allegations regarding the kids and sexual assault, both in the home of the grandma as well as in the home of the mother. And it's just a really kind of sick and tragic story when you think about the children. But in any event, this was going to trial. It was going to court in terms of increased visitation and a different meeting site to get the children. And ultimately, Veronica was fighting for her rights back as a mother. And this was not being well received at all by the grandmother of these children. And she had money. She had money, she had power, and according to different statements that were allegedly made even to her son, she couldn't stand her son being near the children and said some very strong and powerful language at her son in terms of who was going to have control of these children. And it wasn't going to be him. It certainly wasn't going to be Veronica. So about 2 weeks ago, what transpired on this particular Saturday in April was that Veronica went with a lady named Jillian Kelly, who accompanied her to be the monitor over the visitation. Now, this is an interesting detail. Normally, Veronica went with another woman who was the person she liked to go on these visitations with. And they had built up a rapport and a relationship. But this woman said she wouldn't be going. Now, it's later learned why. We'll get to that. But let's stick with this Saturday morning when Jillian and Veronica take off just across the Kansas-Oklahoma border on the most southwest part of Kansas that you can get. And they are heading down a small highway when, as it turns out, they're diverted off the road by the grandmother, the grandmother's boyfriend, and two other friends of theirs that are part of this God's misfit semi-cult group. They're diverted off the road. And from there, we don't know yet the specifics, but we know there was blood. We know there was a gun missing. We know there was a hammer. And they were taken. They were murdered, meaning Jillian and Veronica, and they were buried on the grandma's boyfriend's friend's ranch farm. Specifically, the grandmother's boyfriend had been leasing property to run cattle, to have his cattle on there. And that's the property they went and dug shallow graves. I say shallow, they were 10 foot. Took a little bit to dig, but with the proper equipment, it wouldn't be too bad. And they buried these women there. For about 2 weeks, 2 weeks, this case went unsolved. It went unsolved because of the desolate area where it happened, because of the lack of cooperation by many individuals, and because there were no extensive cell phone towers, there were no video recordings of what transpired. So it took police a little while, but I would submit they did an amazing job. Initially, this was handled by the local department. It was taken over by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI, and the FBI came in and also gave many resources, including tactical resources at the time that the arrest took place. They gave evidence response team support in regard likely to the vehicle as well as to where the bodies were. I'm sure they conducted most of that evidence recovery. They also provided analytical support and support with all of their analysts. They just have a lot of manpower. And that would have been handled out of the Oklahoma City FBI office. So, in any event, the good news was there was resolution. But I don't know if it's complete yet. Specifically, in the affidavit of probable cause that resulted in the arrest of these four individuals, there's another fifth-party culprit named. And it's very interesting because he wasn't charged. So did he have such a peripheral exposure that they didn't arrest him and they're going to count on him for specific details and help regarding exactly what happened? It remains to be seen, but I want to talk about really a huge break law enforcement had that I think led to this case being solved to the point that they could have charges against these four. And this was a brave 16-year-old. The couple that participated in this horrific murder of these two women, they had a daughter. And this daughter, only 16 years old, came forward with details about the crime, details about the planning, details about who participated. And it was those details that were woven together that led law enforcement to put together the conspiracy and to put together the facts so that they could charge these four and get them off the farmland. I would say off the streets, but there's few streets there. To get them in custody so that that community could have a sense of being safe again. And so that the families of Jillian Kelly and Veronica Butler will hopefully be able to find justice. I know this case did finally hit national news. Obviously, I am Very partial to News Nation because News Nation is at the crux of these very important cases. The Gabby Petito case, they owned that case. They provided round the clock coverage of that case and they never stopped. And same with this case. They were the first news organization on scene and they never left it, despite one of the reporters, Laura Ingle, who was actually cornered and followed and felt uh, very fearful for the situation she was in. Again, there was a lot of pressure in terms of a lot of the people that were out there to report on this, a lot of pressure within the community. They knew they didn't fit in. These are very small communities. And it was clear that they didn't appreciate a lot of the outside news media. And they were leveraging some of that anger, I think, over what had happened and what was going on and what they hoped to, I think some at least, obviously the grandma, her boyfriend, and the other couple hoped to conceal. Uh, there's a lot of uh, evidence that exists that's very damning, including searches. And we've only seen three searches, one regarding a taser, and it's believed a taser was actually used in committing the crime. Another search was how to get somebody out of a house. They had hoped to commit this crime, the grandmother, clear back in February, but it took them a while to come up with this scheme. They even bought three burner phones, meaning the grandma, which she passed out to her co conspirators so that they couldn't be traced back to their phones. But those phones actually ended up being part of their demise. You know, law enforcement has a great tool called geofencing where you can tell when different phones are in different areas during a crime. And that is really, I think, some of the strongest evidence that exists in this crime. Those phones, at least two of them, we know were also at the site where the women were found. Now, remember, this is a vast area, and I still think it could be possible that someone cooperated to help really hone them in on exactly where they were on this vast land. But essentially, you're looking at a case that was solved quickly within about 2 weeks under difficult circumstances. And I just wanted to really reach out and give the details about this case because my hope is that in the future, instead of meeting at an abandoned gas station, which is what this judge ordered, that they meet at an abandoned gas station. I know I have to say it twice because it's so illogical to exchange children, especially in a heated custody situation. Have we learned nothing from the Cassie Carley case, where again an ambush took place at a meeting location? And there's many, many more cases. But what I'm hoping is that maybe there could be a law, Jillian and Veronica's law, passed both in Kansas and in Oklahoma, that could lead to change. And that change could be the meeting location for exchange of, of children between parents must be at a place that is safe. It must be at a fire department or at a police station, no matter how inconvenient it is. By law, that is what must be designated. So, anyway, I just wanted to come forward this week and just a case that's really on my heart. And I hope you continue to watch the coverage as developments happen. I can tell you News Nation is going to stay on it. One of my partners in crime, Brian Enton, is all over it. He's in Hugoton now. And you know, really reporting and digging and trying to get as much detail and film footage as possible to bring light to this case. And again, If we bring light, we can bring change so that there'll never be a mother like Veronica and a monitor like Jillian horrifically lose their lives again. I want to thank you all for joining in on Break the Case. If you liked what you heard and saw, please press the subscribe button. I really, really, truly appreciate it. And until next time, may justice be served.